Hi, everybody, and welcome. And thank you, Erica. My name is Rebecca Leigh, and I am the site director for the My Life, My Story project here at the Phoenix VA. I serve two roles, actually. I'm also a peer partner in our Department of Whole Health, facilitating mostly remote sessions working with veterans. My Life, My Story is one of the many offerings that we have available in the Department of Whole Health. And it supports our veterans' mental and physical health. And I'm going to talk a little bit in today's session about how it does that. But I first want to begin by asking each of you the question, and you don't have to share. The first question is, why do you want your health? So, why do I want my health? That's the first question I'd like you to consider today as I speak with you. The second question I'd like you to consider is what matters most to me in my life? And that can run the gamut, of course. So just consider those things as I go through today's session. So I'd like to begin first by sharing a story with you, and then I'll sort of break it apart in terms of how the process works and how that impacts our veteran patients. So this is a de-identified story. The interview took place at the Phoenix VA a couple of years ago, and I was given permission to share this in these settings. My father told me to join the Navy because, as he put it, I didn't fight in 3 wars for you to end up dying in one. As a career Army lieutenant colonel and a Tuskegee Airman, he knew what he was talking about. While I was born in Pittsburgh, PA, as an Army brat, I spent much of my formative years overseas. We lived in Karlsruhe, Germany, and because our maid only spoke German, if we wanted to eat, my brother, sister, and I had to learn the language. When my father went off to fight in Vietnam, we moved to Okinawa, Japan, to be closer to him. It wasn't that difficult to pick up and move often. You just made a decision to not get attached to people. To me, it was like an adventure each time we went to a different place. Throughout all of our moves, my mother was the anchor, while my father was the stabilizing force in our family. He could not have gotten as far as he did in his career without her. When we eventually returned to the States in 1965, it was a culture shock, for me especially, since we ended up in Virginia, which had yet to comply with the rules of desegregation. When I was told I had to use a separate water fountain, I was like, what is wrong with you white people? I mean, I had lived in a predominantly white country with people we had fought a war against, and I never had a problem there because of my race. All I knew about the civil rights movement I'd learned from reading The Stars and Stripes. My parents taught us that nobody is better than us, and we are nobody, no better than anybody else. More specifically, my father would say that we're not black or white, we are Army, so we are green. The fact that I was a light skinned black man unfortunately caused me problems with both black and white people. Following high school graduation, I enrolled at Northern Virginia Community College in part to avoid the draft. Well, I'm here now, so obviously that didn't work. So I joined the Navy in 1969, which seemed like a natural progression for my life. In training, one of the guys I befriended had never met a black person before. He had only seen them on TV, and when his mother heard he was serving with me, she told him to talk to his captain and ask to be transferred to an all-white unit. He didn't, and instead, he invited me to visit him in his hometown, to which I said, hell no. During my 6 years in a combination of active and reserve duty, my home port was Norfolk, Virginia. During my active duty tour, I was assigned to the fast attack combat stores ship USS Sylvania. We provided supplies to the larger ships so they wouldn't have to return to port for things such as food, gas, or ammo. While in the service, I got John Deered by my fiance. I don't blame her. She was still in high school, and I was out in the middle of the ocean. When my tour ended in 1973, I was discharged. I didn't like civilian life, in part because people were so undisciplined and complained about everything. Around that time, I met the mother of my three daughters. After 9 years, their mother and I separated, and she made it difficult for me to see my girls. They were my angels. They were my life, and when I couldn't see them anymore, I didn't want to live. I just wanted to lay down and die. It was that bad. I ended up homeless in New York City, living in an abandoned building in the Bronx. Even though I was homeless, I did have a job as a security guard for a homeless shelter. I was also a chronic alcoholic and contracted TB from one of the shelter residents, although I didn't realize that until later when I was given a physical by re enlisting with the Navy Reserves. By 1991, I was tired of fighting with my kid's mother, and I wasn't getting along with my own mother. So when my sisters moved to the Phoenix area, I followed them. I enrolled in North American College, studied computer operated accounting, but I never did get a job doing that kind of work. Instead, I took on other various jobs through temp agencies such as data entry. I also worked in construction. Basically, I took jobs to keep myself alive, but I was also homeless here. Other than occasional phone calls, I didn't have much contact with my daughters during that time. It was at the VA Job Rehab Center, where they told me I was unemployable, that I found out I was eligible for both military pension and Social Security. That's why I have an apartment where my daughter lives with me. When I came to the VA to be treated for weakness, my legs wouldn't work. They diagnosed me with the big C. I've been here for a while, and I have no idea why they're keeping me here, since I can do everything at home that they're doing here. I'm not concerned with my life's longevity, but with the quality of it. I don't want to be stuck in a hospital bed being spoon fed. What I want is to go home, sit in my own apartment, smoke a cigarette, and drink a Four Loko beer. When I die, I feel like I'll just be moving to another place like I've done my whole life. Veterans have compelling, obviously based on that story, and deeply moving stories to tell. Stories that often shed greater light on their overall health status. In addition to honoring their military service, these stories give a voice to each of our veterans, and that connects with our mission towards patient centered care. Oftentimes, these stories yield clinical information that might go otherwise go undetected. So, a little bit of background about my life, my story. Um, 2013, My Life, My Story began as a volunteer pilot program. I, in fact, started as one of the volunteers at the William S. Middleton Veterans Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. It began in our outpatient mental health unit. The chief psychiatrist at the time wanted to have more than her 15 minutes of time with her patients. She wanted to dive deeper because she understood that our background, the lived stories of our veteran patients really have an impact on their health and well being, physically and mentally. So initially, they thought maybe they'd get the patients to write their own stories. That was not successful. So they reached out to community volunteers. Some had backgrounds in writing, some had backgrounds in medicine, retired doctors and nurses, etc. And it kind of just took off from there. I was then hired to help further develop that program. Um, Thankfully, it became one of the VA's diffusions of an excellence initiative and a gold status project. Again, it continued to blossom there. We then received funding from the Office of Patient Centered Care and Cultural Transformation to hire staff at Madison, but also to disseminate the program to VAs throughout the United States. Eventually being implemented, with implementation nationwide by VA's Office of Veterans Experience. As of 2023, We have over 60 My Life, My Story host sites across the nation, and we've got about a dozen sites now within civilian hospitals and medical centers where we are training medical students and residents in the practice, in the art of interviewing and storytelling to really get to what matters to that patient. Because we have come to understand if we as practitioners, clinicians, know what matters to our patients in terms of their long-term overall health and wellness goals, it leads to more successful health outcomes. So the primary goals of My Life, My Story are helping to connect our veterans with their healthcare providers. And again, as I've mentioned, many of our providers have about 15 minutes with their patients, and it's kind of focused on whatever the current mental or physical diagnosis is, and it doesn't allow for the time to go a little deeper. Maybe there are things in the veterans' lives that really are important for us to know that will direct their care, maybe beyond their current diagnoses or in a different direction. Personal narratives in which patients tell their stories and receive it actually in written form, which is part of the program, have been shown to reduce psychological distress, to increase hope, and to help that patient feel valued. And that last point, I believe, is really critical to the work that we do at the VA, especially at the Phoenix VA, unfortunately, because some of the history that we've had. And so that's really hugely impactful as well in terms of the value that we provide as a facility and making our patients feel as though they are valued and that they're heard. So, how does My Life, My Story work? It's pretty simple, actually. So, there are no set questions, quite frankly. There are a number of questions that can be posed to the veteran, but we're really trying to understand that individual's whole life story. We want to look for patterns. We want to look for those overarching themes that have gotten that individual to where they are today. And so it's really important for me to convey that even though we are working with veterans, the veterans understand that they do not have to talk about their military experience, which might be kind of an odd thing for you to hear. But sometimes trauma or incidents in an individual's life, as I think we all understand, um, can impact us currently in today's life, but could have happened maybe in their childhood. And that's really important to know. So we ask sort of general questions. We allow the patient to lead the conversation. Questions are asked. If they don't feel comfortable answering, we move on to the next one. It's really critical in this engagement, in this dynamic, that the veterans feel safe, that they feel as though they can control the conversation and the interview. And with that, it allows that safe space for them to really open up and talk within that time frame about what really matters to them, what's impacting their life, what has impacted their life. So we ask questions like, what was your childhood like? What was life before, during, and after your service? What career did you engage in? What hobbies do you enjoy today? What matters to you? And again, that question that I pose to all of you, what is it that you want your health for? So after about an hour or so long interview, and interviews currently are conducted at bedside within the Phoenix VA, we receive consultations from providers for this. The veteran can choose not to participate in this, but we certainly go and ask. Um, After about an hour-long interview, a brief 2 to 3 page narrative is written up, and we keep it brief because once it's uploaded into CPRS, our providers, if it's too long, will not take the time to read it. So what's the point? So we keep it brief, 2 to 3 pages. It's returned to the patient. Oh, and I will add, again, thank you, COVID. We are also conducting these interviews remotely, and that has opened up a much larger pool of veteran patients who are interested in engaging in this. So the story is either returned to bedside or a second remote appointment is set up. The interviewer and the patient go over the story. They make corrections and edits. They add, they take away things. It's written in first person. When the veteran patient says, "This sounds like me, this is what I want my providers throughout the VA system to know," a copy is then uploaded into the confidential medical record. It's co-signed to the providers, whether it's mental health clinicians or providers or physical therapists. Whoever that individual works within the system has the opportunity to read that. If the veteran would like a copy or copies to keep for themselves, they have that opportunity as well. I've found that, and I've interviewed well over 500 veterans at this point. Almost all veterans want to keep a copy for themselves. Many of them want to share the story with their family and friends, and having a copy to share with family and friends is much easier than speaking the story. And I found that to be invaluable and also impactful in the healing process. So, with that said, I'm going to share. It's a quick 7-minute introduction video that we put together back in 2014. I think when I was a volunteer, not an employee, still with the Madison VA, that will give you more insight into how the program works overall and how that impacts our veteran patients. So, bear with me, everybody. I'm going to have to share my screen. There we go. I also want to make sure that everybody's.
I don't think there's any sound. Leslie, are you able to help with the sound?
Yeah, yeah, hold on. I forgot about that, Rebecca. If you
Yes, the tech piece. Bear with me, everybody.
Yeah. Okay, so let me see. Yeah, good. When you go back to sharing, Rebecca, there should be a little box near the bottom that says share sound.
Rebecca, let us know if you still need help.
Yeah. You want me to go ahead and play it from this end, Rebecca? Would that be easier?
We could go ahead and take it over, Leslie. It sounds like we
Okay.
lost
I'll
complete
go ahead and
sound.
do-
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
When I was in high school, I was bullied a little bit.
I was a
wanted to
scribe,
prove to other
unfortunately.
people that
I wrote down, they gave me the schedule, and I wrote down multiple copies for the drill instructors to wear in their hats.
It's a long story. We left in World War II when the Russians were coming in.
When I went in,
We were
I really liked
escaping
it.
to
It was, being raised
both
with
of my
two
friends
boys.
were executed.
This is my life and my story. My name is Gene Batchelor. I was born in Blatteville, Wisconsin in 1943.
I think it's about people having a voice.
And you haven't heard about when you're getting out yet or anything like that?
We basically have people who are trained going into veterans' rooms and communicating with veterans, and basically, I think, asking them to tell their story.
The story is really a way to connect providers with veterans, with patients, and have them connect over something that's real and meaningful.
Thinking back on your time in the service, what do you think you got out of it? What did you learn from it, or what did you take away from it?
I learned to follow orders,
And we say, what would you What would you like your provider to know about you? That's really the prompting question. What would you want to share with your healthcare provider? What do you want them to know about you as a person? And from that, we get a tremendous variety of stories.
Yeah, being a supply clerk is like a white-collar job.
So after the interview, which is usually typically an hour, we write up the story.
Well, I used to take those timbers and pick them up and carry them on my shoulder like a toothpick. I used to be a strong
son of a gun, but not anymore. I look forward to it now because part of the process is to come back, is to return after you've written a story and go through it with the vet to make sure that it's sounds good to them. It includes things they want to include. And I can tell you every single time I've come back, the response that I get from the vets, it's generally very emotional, it's very grateful, it's very appreciative. A lot of the vets tell me that they've never told people these things before, they've never had the opportunity. I get a lot of vets who want to give me a hug, who are very tearful afterwards, and it gets me tearful just thinking about it. And that's what brings me back, because I get to see firsthand how meaningful this process is to them.
Did you ever get married?
Ruth. Ruth? Okay. Yeah, to an old schoolmate of mine. She was in the tavern one night, so I asked her for a dance. One thing led to another, and so we started going out together. We were together 24 years. She was a good woman. She had necrotizing fasciitis. That's a flesh-eating disease. Very bad. She was over at the UW hospital in an induced coma for 3 months because they had taken 30 pounds out of her stomach. She lived 8 years after that. Your companion, your compadre, you know, you lose that, and yeah, it's no fun. But life goes on. I still miss her, you know. But I got my cat. I got a little male cat at home, Bandit. He's a good boy. We get along pretty good. He sleeps a lot,
so do I. So we're a good team. He's probably wondering where I'm at. The cat was my favorite part. They've really made it accessible to us, which is important for nurses because you're just running around all day. It's important and part of the healing process for a lot of these vets that they can share their life experiences, and whether it rehashes something that's difficult or rehashes like a really great part of their life, it kind of just brings a new piece to their care.
But I'm a little eccentric. What the hell? As long as I know it, I'm a collector.
I have a 150 caliber black powder cannon. I think it's really helpful because it humanizes the veteran for us. You know, so often I think we get overwhelmed with the clinical picture, looking at lab tests, looking at x-rays, dealing with acute issues, and even though we try to get a feeling for that person, get to know them, it's very difficult, I think, in our time-compressed world.
So how are you doing today?
My story really can help fill in that gap.
So we ended up in Germany.
I know occasionally I've had a few of the nurses of that if they find one that they really find interesting, they'd like to pass it on, say you really should look at this one.
And 58,000 people, guys, died there. I'll scroll down.
I got out of the Army in 1964 with an honorable discharge. I was in for 3 years. I had a lot of jobs after I got discharged. To me, the value in it is what the vets get out of it, is what I give to the vets. And in my way, that's sort of my thanks for their service. Life-changing sounds kind of cliche, but it is. When you get to be a part of somebody's human experience and write this narrative and see the effect it has on them, it brings you back.
And I never have to explain the program. I mean, I can just go into the room and say, you know, we're going to ask you about your story, and people know what I'm talking about. And then when you read a story, people get it. The whole program makes sense to them just when they hear one story. Sometimes time is meaningless to me. Dates and times don't mean anything. Live in the present, and that's it. Don't live in the past. Try to look forward to the future. Right now, I'm thinking I'd like a cigarette. So what do you think?
I like it.
Okay.
You put it down just the way I wanted it.
Okay, good.
When I was in high school, I was bullied a little bit.
I was a
And I
scribe.
proved to
I
other
just
people
loved it.
that
It was
I wrote down, they gave me the schedule, and I wrote down
It was easy to get
copies
to anywhere in Germany.
for the drill instructors to wear in their hats.
It's a long story. We left in World War II when the Russians were coming in, and we were
You know, being raised
escaping.
with 3 boys.
Germany, my friends were executed.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, for your patience with that hiccup. And thank you. Can everybody hear me again?
Yes.
Good stuff. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. And so, you know, one of the quotes from the VA clinician is that it helped them to understand their patients better and to know where they're coming from. And again, that ties in with the current focus, the current mission of our whole health department. But just continuing on a little bit with the how does this work and why does it matter? So, why do stories matter? The interview tells veterans and their families that they matter. Personal narratives allow patients to give meaning to their life's struggles, which I think is an issue that comes up again and again with our veteran patients in comparison to civilian patients. It increases trust of the care team, leading to, again, to better health outcomes. Knowing you're being heard, knowing that the focus is on you and what really matters to you, and you're not just another number, another 15-minute appointment or a 50-minute appointment. But that helps to increase health outcomes. It also allows for a better understanding of how life experiences, both to the veteran and I think to the provider, directly impact health and well-being. For providers, it helps providers build that rapport, that sense of trust with their patients, holding space, if you will, for that patient, which allows them, I feel like in my experiences, to open up even more about what really matters to them. They get to know their patients better without impinging on their time. As I've mentioned, and as was mentioned in the video, it also, for providers, helps them, in some cases, develop treatment plans. In my own experiences with working with veteran patients at the end of their lives, oftentimes we have competing interests. We have doctors who really want to maintain that person's life. We have family members who also want to maintain that person's life, maybe not the quality of that life. And then we have patients who, you know, as in the story, in the video, you know, the patient wanted to smoke a cigarette. In the story that I shared with you earlier, the patient was at the end of his life and he just wanted to be at home. He wanted to be at home. He wanted to drink his beer and smoke a cigarette, and that's how he wanted sort of his ending to be, but did not have the courage or did not have the opportunity to convey that to the people in his life. So in terms of how is this actually done, we have on site at Phoenix, we have myself, a paid interviewer. We have also in the past pre-COVID made use of community volunteers as well as VA staff. For instance, VA staff in our oncology infusion department collect stories, if you will, but we've also made use of students. So we've collaborated in the past with University of Arizona College of Medicine. I'm new to Arizona, so I had to figure out whose logo fit with which, because I know that that's a sensitive subject. University of Arizona College of Medicine, which has a campus here in Phoenix. So it's become a part of their second year medical students as an option for a capstone project. It's also been offered to medical residents to take part in as a special project where they shadow me, they're trained in the interview process, and they sort of run through the entire project experience, if you will, and get an idea of what it's like to really sit down in this time compressed world and deeply know your patient and what's important to them. In terms of an undergraduate level of students that we've worked with, ASU, we've also allowed or had opportunities pre-COVID where we've worked with undergrad and provided internship opportunities in the psychology field, in dietetics, and even pre-med. So with that said, I kind of went through this a little quickly. Does anybody have questions about the My Life, My Story project? Whether it's how to institute one at your facility, how it works, who volunteers for it, etc. I'm happy to open it up now for questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. Anybody that has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'd asked if maybe we can unmute you all to see if you just want to participate. So much great information. At the beginning, when you were telling the story, I definitely started to become tearful. Reminded me of, my time in service, and of course, all the moves and things that we did as well. So.
And I think too, and thank you for sharing your perspective. Many of our providers are civilians. And even though we have worked with umpteen veteran patients, we still don't know. We can't be in their shoes and have those experiences that have led them to this point, and also have led to the decisions that they've made in their lives that maybe have negatively impacted their health and well-being. And I also want to point out on this list of media, the project has been covered nationwide. So if you don't have questions currently, but you would like to maybe do a little bit of reading on your own time, the program has been covered, as you can see, by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, NPR, Washington Post. Psychology Today did an entire article on the impactfulness of My Life, My Story on veteran patient care.
There is a question in the chat. Let's see. The question says, is there an opportunity to add stories from veterans we might work with outside the VA?
Outside of so share in terms of de-identified stories, is that the question?
Dean, do you want to maybe become unmuted and see if we can ask the clarifying questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I work with veterans, many of whom are senior citizens that I'm just trying to help them stay socialized. And I think this might be a good way to bring out some of their, to engage them in something that they might feel close to and willing to share. And if that was something that could be done, is there a way to submit maybe their stories to be included?
And these are veteran patients that you're working with, is that correct? They're patients at the VA, is that correct?
No, these are patients that they're not really patients of mine.
Okay.
I'm just we call it I work with Be Connected as a connection coach.
I'm sorry. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I actually have a list of kind of guiding questions that I provided to my students and the residents that I worked with just to give them a starting point. And that's hugely helpful. And I'm happy to share that with you. If the individual you're working with would like to share their story, absolutely. And what's interesting with my experience, and I can, if you contact me, the next slide will provide my contact information. If you'd like to contact me directly, and I can work with you towards that, and I'd be happy to. But Interestingly, from my work with older adults, their memory becomes so much more specific about things that happened when they were younger. So when I first began this and you might find this in when you begin collecting stories. When I first began this process back in 2013, I was able to interview so many veterans who were still alive from the Second World War and from the Korean conflict, now the Korean War. And it was amazing. They couldn't remember, obviously, in some cases with dementia, they couldn't remember what they had for lunch yesterday. But the visuals and the amount of detail that they were able to provide from their time in the service or that area of their life was, to me, was unbelievable. And now many of those veterans have passed away. I'm now working quite a bit more with veterans who served during the Vietnam era. And what I've noticed is, in that sense, I feel as though enough time has passed between their time in the service. Many of these experiences were incredibly traumatic. Enough time has passed where they feel a sense of safety or wanting to get it out because perhaps they're getting towards the end of their lives. So I'm getting so many more stories from veterans from that era as well. So I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit off script here, but I'm happy to collaborate with you if you want to connect with me, and I can easily share with you tools that we have that I can provide to help you collect those stories. Good question. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you for the question, Dean. It looks like we have Patrick from Alina Health. I'm going to go ahead and unmute him.
Hi.
Hi.
Great presentation. And I can't agree more with the whole health perspective. And our stories are important. And the reason I say that is even like in a clinical setting, you know, we have, it's obviously, I'm speaking to the choir, but a very unique culture, a unique language, and the things that we say might not be things that some clinicians might be used to hearing. I mean, some of them are pretty traumatic, like you just illustrated, you know, for some of those Vietnam vets that had some really traumatic experiences and maybe coming forward now to talk. But what I've seen and heard recently is that some people are trying to soften some of the quotes or the language that some of our veterans are sharing with their clinicians. And I'm not entirely sure that that's like a really good idea. I'm not saying the VA. I'm just saying I've heard this. But you know, when you put stuff in clinicals and you don't like to use the expletives or you don't like to use words that might seem offensive or whatever, but those are being direct quotes from our vets, I'm not sure that they're meeting the vet where they're at. And I think that's part of the reason why some people are balking to go and get some help. So, I want to just acknowledge that I appreciate how open and honest your approach is. Like, tell the story. And the other is just to let others know that there are folks that are out there that are like, I don't want to write down what that vet said because I thought it was offensive. So I think that's not a really good way to provide that whole health like healing for those people that are seeking services. But excellent presentation. I mean, everything that you were talking about, it's like my head is kind of sore because I was nodding up and down about everything that you were saying. Seriously.
Thank you.
Yep. No, great presentation. So,
Thank you.
yeah. And that's the only other one. The thing that I wanted to say is that, you know, about people trying to soften up some of the even the quotes that people are saying in clinical notes because they just didn't like what they heard from people. I don't think it's counterintuitive to people seeking services. Do you know what I mean?
I do. And
Okay.
again, it's that issue of trust. Are you hearing me? Are you and we purposely create our stories in the first person. I do my best with Southern accents and lots of F-bombs. I mean, I'm working with veterans and I want to keep it real and I want to maintain their integrity of who they are. I don't want to fluff it up for anybody. And what happens is you know, the point of my stories, when you read them, if you are a friend or a relative or even a doctor to say, oh my gosh, this sounds like so-and-so, that's the point of the stories. Because my job is really to write, is to be the pen. And I think that's really important. And so veterans, when they know they can speak the way they normally speak and be angry and be upset, and it's the only time they can do that in their own medical chart, as far as the VA is concerned, it's so empowering, and they own the story and they feel like they're heard. It's hugely helpful. So thank you for reinforcing that.
Yep. I've been going to the vet center since 2007. I'm a combat vet and came back kind of messed up. And, you know, I went to my counselor for the first time in 07, like I said, and he listened and he told me basically, I've been doing this a long time and I'm a Vietnam vet, but I have to tell you, you've got one of the most effed up stories I've ever heard, but all that did was reinforce the trust. And I still stay with the vet center to talk to people because I know that established that trust. So, and it's done a whole lot to get me much more better.
So I'm sorry, everybody, do you get your care through the VA?
Yeah, you know, I work for Molina Healthcare, excellent organization, and we do a lot to help people out. We're an access contract provider, and we do some really, really good work. But I'm a combat vet that's 90% disabled, and I trust the VA for all of my medical and mental health services.
And he was not a plant. I appreciate that. Thank you. Hey,
all right, I'm done. Somebody else might want to talk.
My contact information is on the screen. Connect with me. I'd love to interview you.
Perfect. All right. I'll talk to you soon. My time is done.
Thank you. And I will tell, just to wrap up, part of the reason I became interested in this is my father was a combat veteran. He and his 3 brothers served at the same time during the Second World War. And he was drafted. My brother was drafted into the Army infantry during Vietnam. And as my dad said, the war took my brother 50 years to kill him. These are men who were incredibly important in my life who never shared their stories. And I saw how it destroyed them. And I've become more cognizant of generational trauma because of that. And that is what led me to doing this work. So thank you again, everybody, for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for sharing that heartfelt story as well. The work you do is incredible, and I was definitely touched the first time I heard about what you do, and that's why I wanted to welcome you to the summit and obviously future events. So thanks again.
Thank you.
We just have a couple more moments if anybody has questions. However, if you just want to go back to the original session, there will be some closing remarks held by Sandra Ballister. Many of the local locations here at the Phoenix 32nd Street location, we're doing an in-person event where there will be breakout sessions. And if you registered, the lunches will be provided. So please come on down if you're interested. There's vendor tables set up as well. Again, Tucson and Prescott, I'm sure that you guys, if you've registered for those events, may already be there. However, I think that their event will be in person until 4:30 this afternoon as well. So reach out to Rebecca directly if you have any other thoughts, needs, desires, or want to maybe do this yourselves. So